matching the chair,
Hmm.
and it's like throwing me off. It's making me look like my shoulders are massive, but it's just because
Yeah.
the chair is like. So 206 of the Ego Chall Podcast starts now, previewing the second to last week of online matches before Major 1. Join us on Twitch or YouTube. Tweet. YouTube isn't super delayed. All right, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Good on Twitch. I lied. I think I was hearing Twitch because I don't hear shit on YouTube yet. Okay, we're going on YouTube.
You ready to get started?
Is there?
Hello and welcome to episode 206 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, very fittingly, considering our recent conversations, especially about the NPC on last episode, we have some potentially big nerfs to talk about in Black Ops 7 that could have a major impact on the way that the Call of Duty League is played in the next few months. We also are going to give our predictions for the penultimate week of the Major 1 qualifiers. We have OpTic versus Los Angeles Thieves this week, which I think is maybe not going to be the most competitive match, but it certainly might be the most interesting and intriguing match of the slate. But before we get to any of that, how you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Anticipating this to be one of our shorter episodes in recent times, but we've been saying that a little bit here and there, and never works out that way. So I guess we'll see what happens here. But I would be very shocked if this is a long episode. Not too much news, and we got 8 matches to run through and preview before this weekend. So, yeah, I guess not a ton of news can be considered a good thing, but some based on some of the topics and stuff we discussed last episode, last couple, maybe some people were expecting a little bit more news, kind of, the LAT situation and everything. Haven't heard much from that. So yeah, not too much, but we can jump right in.
Yeah, I mean, I should note that we're doing this show on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's kind of been a running bit for years now since we've been doing this podcast, but typically a lot of stuff happens right after we do this show, whenever that is. Sometimes we've done it on a Tuesday and stuff drops on Wednesday. Sometimes we've done it on Wednesday, stuff drops on Thursday, or just after we did it on Wednesday. So who knows? We might get a roster change, or maybe even more than that. I've said it previously, and I'll say it again here, just right off the top, that if LAT is going to make a change, it would make sense to just wait until after the OpTic match, because that's a really bad match to debut a new iteration of a roster, regardless of who you are, and especially if you're bringing in a rookie like Neum, which is what people think is going to happen considering he's the substitute. But we'll definitely get into that as we move forward in the show. I think the biggest thing, though, that we should talk about is the nerfs. So yesterday, January 13th, my 28th birthday, so this was a big... this was a big... I guess it really changes how this game could be played, but you mentioned in the pre-show that it might not matter at all, because something we talked about in the last show was with the NPC, players don't really seem to want to kind kind of test it out, want to deal with another gun, and that feels like what could happen with this. So the Dravec and the M15, two of the best guns, the two guns that people are very, very hyped about and very attached to at this point, are both nerfed in as of yesterday. We should say that they're not going to play on this patch most likely until after Major 1. I don't know if that's like 100% confirmed. I don't know if Spin a Spence said anything, but we've seen that in the past before that, considering there are only 2 weeks left in the qualifiers and then the major, that you wouldn't think that they'd play on these this patch, but this seems big. How big do you actually think the Dravec and M15 nerfs are for Black Ops 7?
Yeah, first and foremost, happy belated birthday. I feel like a terrible friend because
It's all right.
I knew. So I don't go on Facebook at all, but I know that in January, Mike Merchant, you, and Tremi all have your birthdays in January. So literally, like right after New Year, I went on Facebook and I double checked all three of your birthdays. And I knew they were in January with the intention of wishing you guys a happy birthday. And for Mike's was on the 9th. Whatever reason, I thought the 9th was a Saturday because I was telling myself, like, oh, Mike gets to watch the Packers playoff game on his birthday. But the 9th was on the Friday, and I if it wasn't for Central Time, I would have missed Mike's birthday because I would have wished him happy birthday on the 10th when I thought it was the 9th. And then for you, I just completely forgot about it. So now I have to 0 for 2, but I got to make sure that I can redeem myself a little bit by wishing Tremi. I'm going to make sure I remember his birthday on the 18th now. So,
Maybe for his
sorry.
birthday he can get a pick'em win this year. I won't guarantee it, but maybe that's
No, no,
something
no,
we
we
can
can't,
work
we
out.
can't.
Don't want to spoil him.
um But yeah, back to the weapon nerfs here and stuff. It's definitely interesting. I think, like you said, that's the biggest thing with this is it probably will not impact anything pre-major one because I would be surprised if this patch was fully implemented, like you said. Um, we have it's just inconsistent on that front. Like in some cases, I think it was even earlier this year. Maybe it was the season 1 update. There was the overload change where like you got the pistol with when you're carrying the device in overload, and that was implemented right away. So maybe this year they're just doing the live patch. I'm not sure. That's just speculation. We'll have to wait and see. But the big thing for me at least is I haven't played multiplayer since this update came out, so I haven't tested either of these guns myself. But I said it to you before we started recording. It is very possible that even with these nerfs, these are still the two guns that are predominantly used in competitive and CDL play, and that's
Hmm.
just how it's been in competitive COD. Whether we agree, I think we both made it clear over the recent episodes and in the last couple of years that we both aren't huge fans of the way this goes down, but that's just like the weapons get nerfed and the pros aren't willing to try other guns, as we've seen most recently with this whole NPC GA debate and whatnot. Maybe it's a case where that Razor SMG that was getting a little bit of shine after the NPC was GA'd or that whole stuff towards the end of last week. Maybe the Razor will see a little bit more play once these nerfs and stuff come into play, but it's also very possible that these nerfs just like hit the guns and they are still used by the pros. Now, I guess at the very start of this game, it was looking like it was very possible that there were going to be a lot of maps where it was 8 M15s, and that
Hmm.
already isn't what we're seeing right now in the current pro play. So I think it's, the little silver lining is it's very possible that these changes could impact um, the meta, at least in terms of impacting how many ARs and SMGs are seen. If the M15 hits are bigger, there are technically more AR options available just by virtue of the NPC being G8 already, and I think there's only this is gonna sound like a 6-7 joke. It's not. I'm pretty sure there are 7 ARs and 6 SMGs or 7 SMGs and 6 ARs, but I think there's more ARs than SMGs in this game. I'm just trying to remember from when I was doing the camos and zombies. I'm pretty sure it was 7 and 6 though. Um, so if there are more ARs, there is the possibility of more options, but there's a burst AR that isn't a marksman rifle and stuff, so that's just like automatically not going to be considered as an option. So it's really, you know, in a situation where it's good that we're seeing these nerfs, because it's pretty obvious that these are the two best weapons and the most popular options for the pros in each of the weapon categories. So seeing the devs uh, pretty early, because I mean it is still only January 2026, so we're like 2 months after launch, seeing them targeting these weapons pretty early on in the game's life cycle could could be beneficial for the more casual player base, but I'm just not entirely convinced that this will have a massive impact on the pro meta. But we talked about it last episode, mostly like with the PDW and Black Ops 2, that feels ancient to consider, but there have been games in the past where uh, the early weapon meta is just completely erased, and it's replaced by other stuff. That just hasn't really been what's happened in recent CODs, but it's not completely unheard of in competitive COD. It's just been a long, long time.
Yeah, so I was just looking at what guns are currently GA'd, just kind of get a feel for it, because if let's just say the Dravec and M15 nerfs are just like, the players are just fed up with playing with these guns because they know how good they can be, and they're not gonna, they don't want to go backward. The guns that are currently GA'd are, for submachine guns, the RK9 and the MPC, which is very recently GA'd, as we saw. And then the assault rifles, the MXR 17, AK 27, X9 Maverick, Maddox, and the Peacekeeper MK1. I don't know if any of them ever come back. It feels like it feels like some people were trying to push for the Peacekeeper to get unga'd. Is there any kind of, has it happened? Has that happened where some gun has actually been unga'd at any point? I can't really think of one off the top of my head. There have been a few conversations, and there have been pushes by some players or members of the community to do that, but I just don't see that actually happening. So, like, what are the options at this point? And I really do feel like they're just going to keep playing with these guns. That's just stubbornness, I would imagine, because these guns, especially the Dravec, I should say, because the M15, I think you can argue that the nerf is not the worst in the world, because they nerfed the max range damage and the medium damage on the M15. But the Dravec, the max range, the medium range, range damage, like all of that stuff is just completely taken down. The explanation for what they did is, it is receiving a substantial range reduction across the board. The combination of great range and extremely low recoil continued to make this weapon too versatile. Even with slower mobility and handling, we still want to keep the recoil for the same reason we've mentioned in the past, which is keeping each weapon in the class feeling unique. By reducing the damage, reducing the range, the base Dravec trades away more power for its consistency. You would think stuff like that would make this kind of an unplayable gun and really change the meta. I just think we're just far past that as like a competitive community. I don't think that there's any kind of adapting that happens in the CDL nearly as much as it used to, which is really kind of awful if you think about it, because if you watch League of Legends, obviously you're a big League guy, like they nerf champions into the absolute ground, and then they
every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and they buff champions that haven't been playable in sometimes years, and then you look on the LCS or the LEC or the LPL, and you're like, what is this champion, like what is happening right now? And you see like the best players in the world, they've adapted. They obviously they have some base knowledge of these champions typically, but I mean, like, they get up to speed very, very quickly, and they adapt to whatever Riot is deciding to do. And sometimes people obviously have those issues with Riot, and it's like, why are you doing this? Like, this is just making the game worse and less fun, or not as fun to watch. But when, any of the developers for Call of Duty do that, the players are just like, no, not going to do that. Like, we're not playing this game. I'm still using my AR, still using the SMG that I've been using for the last 2.5 months. I just think that's kind of awful as a player. Like, even in Counter-Strike, they will buff weapons and nerf weapons, even though there are fewer weapons in Counter-Strike, or viable weapons typically, than in Call of Duty. And yet, like, they play around with those things, and I think they just get used to it and they adapt, and I think it adds another layer to the competitive scene. We just don't have that in Call of Duty. We don't have the players that really want to do that, except a guy like Shotzi. Shotzi does seem to be kind of wanting to push the envelope a little bit and make people use these things, but I don't see that actually happening here.
I'll push back on the adaptability, and maybe it's splitting hairs here, but that one thing I will always defend Call of Duty players on is their ability to adapt to different COD titles every
Mm-hmm.
year, because it's the only esport where they are literally playing a different game every single year, and they only play it for 1 year. Like the League of Legends pros and the Counter-Strike pros, like, yes, they're are champions and updates and stuff happening frequently in those games, but it's still the same game at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And you can argue with Call of Duty that it's at a very basic level, it's still the same game, just a different setting, different gun, different movement, yada yada. Um, but that's like, for me, the one thing that separates COD pros from other esports pros is their ability to adapt, and for especially the top COD pros is the ones who are good in one game, and then they are still equally as good or even better in the very next game, even though those two are different. And when we're in the same, like, quote unquote era, as we've broken it down before, it's not as big of a deal. But like when we've gone from boots on the ground to jetpacks, and then jetpacks back to boots on the ground, those transitions, and players are still at the top despite the big differences, that's where it's like the most impactful to me, and stands out the most to me. But I definitely agree on, like, the GA front, at least. Like, that's always been a thing to me, is like, these pros they have the ability to adapt. The guys who make the decision on GAs, like, are mostly, you know, top players who have shown this ability to adapt from game to game, but they seemingly, either just because they don't want to, or for whatever reason, they don't want to have that same adaptability when it comes to this specific gun balance and that stuff. So it is a bit of a give and take there, but it is weird, um, when you think about it like that. Like, these pros that show such an ability to adapt from one game to another, but don't want to have that same energy or whatever directed towards the game itself and what gun they're actually using. I don't know how else to break it down, but it definitely is something that makes COD esports unique in that aspect.
Yeah, I agree with you that the adaptability happens year over year. It's just
Yeah,
within the year.
yeah,
I mean, maybe it is just that it's like they kind of get overstimulated with how much change happens, like from BO6 to BO7. Maybe not the best example, but I'm sure
yeah.
there will be quite a few differences between BO7 and the rumored Modern Warfare 4. So that change could be pretty stark. And then maybe after that, the players are like, I've dealt with so much change from September to November that I really don't want to change it all from November to June, which I get, but I also don't think it should be up to the players. I think that we should have what the NFL has, and I'm not saying the NFL is particularly good at this, but the idea is good, is this competitive committee or competition committee where obviously the players should be involved, and there should be input from the players, there should be input from the owners, and obviously the league itself, and trying to find common ground of, like, we need to innovate and change things as the season goes along, whether it be guns or whether it be maps. I don't think game modes is probably the way to go. That would cause so much chaos if they were swapping in third game modes and being like, we're having overload now, and then we're doing control and capture the flag. Like, I don't know if that would really work out in the CDL's favor, but change during the season, especially with how monotonous the online qualifiers can get, I think is a good thing. They obviously want something like this because we talked about it before and we made fun of it before, but the bounty matches were definitely trying to add an element of difference and hype to these otherwise like meaningless, or not meaningless, but like they're this identical matches to what we've been watching for the previous 3 months, but now there's $50,000 in line. Like, who gives a shit? That to me shows that they do want something like this, the league itself. But the players kind of need to get on board or need to be dragged along to make this kind of viable and more interesting, and bring in viewers, which is definitely the number one priority. And if you're not using the guns that people in public matches use, I feel like that's a major misstep for competitive Call of Duty. And that's been something that's happened over years. So I don't want to say that that's a new development, but there has to be some connection between the casual audience that just plays Call of Duty and has no idea what competitive is, or just simply don't interact with it, and the competitive scene. How we get there is kind of, we'll see. What were you saying?
I didn't want to cut you off. I thought you were done. I was going to say perfect opportunity. That's never going to happen is Activision hires Slasher to officially run some competitive integrity committee or whatever, and he's just in charge of it. And it obviously be a little different for this year because he played it, but in like the next year's game, he just like goes into the game week 1, tries out the stuff. He's like, yeah, okay, these are the guns you guys can pick from. All the other ones, screw it, have fun, and you got to make it work. And Slasher would be like an unbiased entity that we've always had the jokes of the Slasher World League, but it would give him a job post retirement, and it would actually, I mean, he's been pretty good about identifying that sort of stuff over the years. So it is a pipe dream though, because it'll never happen. But if it did happen, that'd be pretty funny.
Or we make it Clayster, because he kind of jokingly, but not really, was like, maybe we bring in Bouncing Betties one year because I think he was so fed up with the GAs. So maybe they co-head the competition committee, and then they just fight to the death, like over every single gun in the game, which would be kind of interesting, I think.
You have to step down from being coach though, if we want this to be a true unbiased committee.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Brady's definitely not the owner of the Raiders and calling NFL games. Yeah, so we waited to do the show at least until afternoon today because Miami was kind of teasing something. The Heretics were teasing something was going to happen. I thought it was just going to be like another jersey or whatever. They actually announced that Lucky, formerly a player for Heretics, is joining their coaching staff as an assistant coach. I mean, I think this is cool. Obviously, they have like a very long history with Lucky, and both iterations of like the CWO Heretics as well as the CDL Heretics. He's a very well-known Spanish player. He was on the Toronto Ultra in that first season of the CDL. I think he played, if I'm not, like, did he end up getting into the CDL, or was he one of those guys that sat the bench the entire time?
For the start?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure him and Metals were the first roster. I think the first roster was Metals, Lucky, Looney, Methods, and Bance? I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, Methods, Looney, Classic, Cammy, and Metals announced the starting roster on January 21st. And so Bance, Brack, Kleenex, Lucky, and Mayhem were substitutes. And I don't think Lucky ended up getting in because I'm looking at his Wikipedia page, and the only roster news is the January 21 announcement of their starting roster, and then September 4th when it's announced that he, Classic, Brack, Looney, Mayhem, and Metals are leaving the team.
Okay.
So he was one of the guys. Obviously, they had a 10-man roster. They were the only team to do that, if I'm not mistaken. And they, I mean, they were decent, I think. I don't know if they were particularly great, but they had that roster. He was on it. He did not get into the CDL. Then he stayed in Europe for a bit. Then he came with that Rocker Academy team, which I believe was an all-Spanish team, if I'm not mistaken. And then he obviously joined the Heretics in 2023. I think this is interesting. I don't know how much it moves the needle. We've talked about the coaches and how much they do, like what impact they really have. But this is a weird time for Miami. So what do you think about bringing in Lucky as an assistant?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I was honestly thinking it was going to be adding a new player to the
Mm,
roster because this is like the first year that they haven't had a 5-man roster. At least maybe they have somebody as a sub that I'm not even aware of. They very well could. But I even saw in some of the comments to the post that people were tagging this guy Nvidian and
yeah.
Envdian. Um, and so like even people in the comments were seemingly thinking that maybe it was like a sub or a new player being added to the roster. And I mean, the graphic that they posted yesterday was just like the outline of a hooded figure sitting in a chair, and that's what made me think that. So I did get a little more excited for this announcement than probably necessary, but obviously good for Lucky. Stepped away from the team last year, and like you said, he has that relationship. Even like I believe Method Sick is the head coach for Miami. If he's not, he's some sort of coach there. And Lucky and them teamed together and played together during that CWL era of the Heretics, like you said. So, they have a pre-existing relationship, even dating back to last year, where they were player and coach relationship. Now it's going to be coach and coach coaching together, and Lucky has the relationship of uh, teaming with Rencor and Metals just this past year. Obviously was replaced by Super, so didn't necessarily play with him, but Super was a part of the team, so it's not like he's a total stranger. And he has some experience that he could possibly pass on to Drakes, which is the biggest thing for Miami at this point is getting Trakes up to speed and helping him acclimate in his first year in the CDL, and somebody who's done it before is obviously going to be um, able to give more valuable experience than somebody who doesn't have that experience. So should be should it's just a move that makes sense, and I don't think there's much beyond that. I think we've seen a lot from coaching staffs that have multiple coaches are more successful. That there are obviously cases where teams with only one coach do find success, but I feel like when you have these teams that have the multiple coaches, and especially, obviously as the S&D guy, I loved when teams had S&D coaches. That seemingly isn't as much of a thing right now, but the multiple coaches do help, divvy up the work and gives more sets of eyes on the gameplay and whatnot. It seems beneficial, at least from the outside looking in. So maybe this is a small move on paper that could have a big impact for Miami, who is in a position that they gotta win some matches quick here ahead of Major One.
Yeah, they just need to finish these last 2 weeks with wins. They can't. I don't want to say that they can't make a run through losers bracket because we've seen pretty solid teams do that, but just don't put yourself in that position. They have some pretty winnable matches before the end of the qualifiers, and I think there's potential. They definitely have underperformed pretty severely, I think, from where I expected them to be, and I think a lot of people expected them to be, because even if you look at those coach power rankings, the poll that they had before the CDL came back, Miami was 5th or 6th in that, and right now they're on the brink of getting into the losers bracket to start Major One, and some of those matches have been very winnable for them. So I think that does kind of indicate how disappointing this start has been. But like you said, Trakes just needs to get more practice, more playing time, I don't know if it's necessarily like a legend situation. Obviously, legend's a little bit different because he hadn't even played Call of Duty competitively before, where Trakes had played in challengers with former pros last year. But I don't know. I think it just be more patient with him and just see how things go. But I could see Miami. I don't know who it would be necessarily because, they kind of pull these players out of thin air, it seems like, because we're not following like the Spanish speaking COD scene, but they seem to be really in tune with it and they've done it before. Obviously last year with Super, it was like, all right, like here we go. He's one of the best rookies in the league, one of the most impactful players over the last half of the season. And, they made quite a few runs as a result of that. That could be something that happens here if Trakes is not able to pick up the slack and help this team get back to at least like the middle of the pack that I think a lot of people expected them to at minimum be in. But we'll see what happens with Miami and their roster. No news, no update on the Kenny LAT front. Not even like really a whisper about it. I think that's interesting. I think that's good. You definitely don't want there to be just a ton of rumors and a bunch of people talking about like, oh man, like it's happening. It's gonna, it's going down next week or whatever. I think that would be very disrespectful, especially for a player of Kenny's stature and legacy to just be talked about in those terms. We saw that with OpTic last year, where there was kind of like this rumor of like, well, I mean, post whatever it was, 0.3 KD, people were like, it's got to happen. And that was like even worse because they were defending world champions and there's so much that goes into that and it being OpTic. I'm glad that's not happening, but I feel like like the change is probably going to happen. Like even players, like former players are talking about it. Like Temp is talking about Kenny like in his play, which obviously like Temp and Kenny have gone back like years and like we're best friends and all that. The Flank is talking about stuff like that. It just seems an inevitability at this point, does it not?
Oh yeah, it definitely feels like it's. Feels like the only thing that would save this from happening is LAT winning Major One, which at this
Yeah.
point right now just doesn't seem possible. But obviously, with the players they have and all that talent, and it is worth noting at least maybe this is a team we've seen it in the past. Teams struggle online, but they just play much better on LAN. If this was the case for this team, it wouldn't surprise me with the guys
Mm-hmm.
on the squad, but it would kind of surprise me in the sense that like they weren't able to succeed online just because they obviously know what they're doing and they're super talented. But yeah, it definitely feels like it's inevitable, and maybe honestly it's at the point where they want to ride it out for Major One, and then after Major One they might like try and see what other teams are making team changes, and maybe like we always talk about the dominoes falling. Maybe some other team makes a change and then LAT scoops up an AR player that is dropped by another team that they think could be a better fit, and maybe someone with more experience. I don't even really have any good names that come to the top of my mind, but that could be a possibility here. I just think um, the no news isn't it. I was trying to think of how I wanted to phrase this. The fact that we haven't heard anything on the Kenny front isn't like doesn't mean that nothing is happening behind the scenes, but it definitely seems like nothing is happening this week at least, which is what we've talked about. And with all the stuff we've heard previously about like having to submit roster changes and stuff, early in the week of match weeks, it seems like unless there's like some emergency situation, which I guess maybe there's some like loophole there where they could say like, oh, Kenny's quote unquote sick, we have to get an emergency sub in. Maybe that's something that could happen over the next couple days before the match. But other than that, it seems like Kenny's locked in for the HBR Classic this weekend.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like like I said at the top of the show, like if you're gonna bring in Neum, don't bring him in versus OpTic. Like that's just a kind of a ridiculous thing to expect of a rookie, especially with how poorly LAT has performed against Toronto and Paris, two of the top 5 teams, and to do it against the defending world champions, the most popular team in the league. I just think that would be kind of crazy for LAT to do that. But you know, crazier things have happened, I guess, in the CDL. Only other thing really is Havoc saying that he's not going to be competing in challengers anymore. He was on the Stallions Red roster, if I'm remembering correctly. And then I saw on Twitter as well that Zuma, obviously the owner and founder of the Stallions, was talking about how Havoc wasn't going to be on the Stallions roster anymore because he knows that when ranked play drops, then Havoc will just kind of be focused on that and not necessarily competitive, which makes sense because Havoc is like a full-time streamer and content creator. And I think that there is value in being in challengers and doing that because you can obviously create content out of like competing in challengers. At the same time, he needs to be on a team that is like fully that. Like if it was like him and Temp and Bance and like these former like retired or just like former CDL pros that wanted to team together and play for fun, I think that could be entertaining, and I think that could be something that Havoc could do specifically. But like I said, when we were talking about the coaches and how Stallions is like getting coaches that are actual coaches and not like just content creators. If you're an aspiring CDL player, I don't want my coaches to be guys that are just doing it for content and not trying to make me better and trying to get me to the CDL, because that would just piss me off. Is like I don't have anything to fall back on. I don't want these guys who are just coming in to like shoot the shit to be, just goofing around. So I think it makes sense for Havoc to step away. I think it makes sense for the Stallions guys to go a different direction. Obviously, you're a much bigger fan of Havoc. Not saying I'm not a big fan, but obviously you have years and years of history with Havoc. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I just looked over at Twitch, and he's got 2.1 viewers, right? 2.1K viewers
Yeah.
right now watching him stream. So, like, I think he's good if,
Yeah.
I think he's making the right decision. He's been streaming, and I think the biggest thing has been the lack of ranked play, which is really where he seemingly took off in recent years. Like, he was, like, doing a ton of challenges, like making fresh accounts and like going from bronze to whatever the highest rank is, only playing solo, and then he was doing other challenges around that and stuff. Like he's been grinding ranked play and stuff, and without ranked play around, and him playing challengers for a little bit, like you said, gets a little content. Um, and from the clips I saw, at least in some instances in challengers, he was still frying, which isn't too surprising, just given how much he's been grinding ranked and everything like that. So um, I'm a big Havoc fan, and I like to see him compete, but I think end of the day the streaming thing has been where he's found the most success, and yeah, I think that's the good call. I mean, I didn't even realize. Do you know how many followers he has on Twitch? For context, he has 90,000 followers on Twitter. How many do you think he has on Twitch?
No idea.
416,000.
Holy shit.
I would not have guessed it was that high, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
Good for him.
I mean, it's we like. I think we're kind of spoiled by how big some of the COD players were like pre CDL. Like Havoc was a huge streamer. Like when you were watching him, he was getting thousands of viewers at the time, and like he was playing. Anybody that was playing S&D tournaments on a consistent basis were kind of pulling in at least like a few hundred viewers. If you're talking about like obviously Tupac, I didn't even really care about S&D tournaments, and yet Tupac was like the guy to go to because you knew at 12 a.m. that he was probably streaming some kind of tournament. Mutex was another one, obviously Tremmy, big fan of Mutex, and like Havoc was that kind of guy. Plus he had the Call of Duty Pro credentials that also helped him. And he has this engaging, like very energetic personality, which I would say not a lot of COD pros have. If you watch their streams, a lot of them are very monotone, very like low energy, especially like trying to communicate with the stream. And Havoc, it just isn't that. So it makes complete sense that he's doing, he's killing it on Twitch. I think it is kind of a loss though, because the challenger scene could use someone like him to just bring eyeballs onto these players that don't get nearly as much attention as they should, or a scene that doesn't get very much attention as well. But I can't blame him at all for it. And I hope the very best for him. And he's got like what, 454,000 more followers than we do on Twitch. So maybe he should share the wealth a little bit. Do you want to talk about Clayster's dad? I know you texted me this.
I just saw it. I couldn't believe it. That Clay like seemingly tweeted yesterday. It's always funny randomly scrolling and seeing my dad on Twitter, and it's some like, old school black and white band playing, and like people, even like Hitch was in the comments saying like what, and then like Clay responded with a Wikipedia link to his dad, Jerry Eubanks, who was the original saxophonist, keyboardist, and flautist for the Marshall Tucker Band, which I don't know the band or anything like that, but it even says on the Wikipedia page he's the father of the competitive Call of Duty player James Eubanks, better known as Clayster. So that was just a random lore drop on a Tuesday that I wasn't expecting.
But when you see him, if you haven't seen this tweet, go to Clayster's Twitter, and it's one of his most recent ones. You can see the resemblance, especially old Clay, like United Clay, ponytail Clay. So you can see the resemblance between the two. Do you want to talk about the matches? I will say we're just about the 40-minute mark, so you kind of hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, I think we can dive in, and not much else there.
So we are now a few weeks away from the first major. We have this week and then next week of qualifiers, and then Major 1 begins. Friday, January 16th, we'll start the matches with Vancouver and Miami. We just talked about Miami. I'm not feeling too confident about this match, considering how the Heretics performed last weekend. Obviously, Vancouver picked up their first win of the season last week in TJ Haley's debut. So it doesn't seem like nearly as a foregone conclusion as it probably would have been had this happened to begin last week. Yeah. I'm still going to go with Miami. I still think there's a lot more current potential for the Heretics than Vancouver. But, Miami has kind of definitely underperformed. I don't want to say kind of. Oh, yeah. Vancouver did look better with TJ. I just don't know if it's enough. So I'll go with Miami here.
Yeah, I'm going Miami too, and I had the exact same train of thought as you. I think this was like a slam dunk Miami pick last week before the matches, and now Vancouver with that reverse sweep over Boston. It's got me thinking a little bit more, and maybe if Miami was playing a little better, I wouldn't consider it, but it's definitely like in the back of my head here that this just isn't exactly a, pick it and lock it sort of match where I'm super confident. I think there are a couple matches this week like that where it's like, maybe I would be thinking, maybe I'm a little more hesitant to pick a team, but I think end of the day I got to go with Miami here. I just think, especially from a matchup perspective, like we've talked about S&D for Vancouver potentially being a route to success. S&D is one of Miami's best modes historically with three of these guys at least. So I think this might be a tougher matchup on paper due to that, and I'm going to stick with Miami.
Shout out Dominic Wood in the YouTube chat. Appreciate your support. Next up, we have Falcons versus Gentlemates, which I'm going to go with Paris, but I think this is a really interesting match because the Falcons, they started off 0-2. They played OpTic and LAT to start the season. Then they beat Carolina, they beat Boston, and last week they beat Minnesota in Game 5. Obviously, Minnesota, Boston, and Carolina, especially pre-Exceed, not the strongest, like most consistent teams. Certainly a level or two down from Paris, who is definitively one of the top three teams, like at minimum. So I'll go with Paris, but I want to see how the Falcons actually play this. If they're competitive against Paris, maybe that is pretty, that can inspire some confidence in this team moving forward. Versus like what I think of them now is like they can beat the lower tier teams, but they're kind of like not on the level of that top five, top six. So who do you got? Paris versus Riyadh?
Yeah, I'm going Paris, and we are literally on the same exact wavelength for reasoning as well. I've been saying it these past couple weeks, like breaking down the Falcons' schedule and whatnot. This is a case that goes back to week one where Falcons are playing a top team, and that didn't go well for them last time around. However, like you said, with Paris's last matchup against Cloud9, maybe that gives Falcons a little extra fuel. I'm not entirely sure how that would correlate to what I was thinking there, but um, maybe it's just a case where a little post holiday break fogginess or lag, whatever. I don't know what I'm trying to say right now. End of the day, Paris should win this match. But I will be excited to see how Falcons stack up because that's how I've been like thinking of this Falcons team is they've been the squad, struggle against the top teams, take care of their business against the middle of the pack. This is another opportunity for them to showcase what they can do against the top team, and we'll have to see how it pans out.
Harry in the YouTube chat said Miami slamming Vancouver boys. Come on now. I don't know. I definitely would have thought that before
Yes.
last week because obviously Vancouver hadn't won a map. And even Miami at their worst is still like they still should be able to beat the bottom tier teams. But I mean, I just think with Heretics how inconsistent they are, like it really is kind of a map to map thing with them, which is not what you want. Like it really is kind of frightening when that happens. I mean, that's kind of a Boston deal sometimes where you're like, I mean, one map they look like almost like world champion contenders, and then the next they're like the 12th place team in the CDL. I think that could be something to watch here with Vancouver and Miami. And we'll see with the Falcons and Paris. Like Paris did not look great against C9 last week. Like they very easily could have lost that series and been swept, which we talked about would have been like one of the most shocking results in recent CDL history. And Falcons, they're on a little bit of a streak here, so maybe they're feeling themselves and have worked out some of the kinks that they had to start the season. Saturday, January 17th, we start off with Miami versus Boston. Obviously, the Heretics, they play back-to-back days. If they lose to Vancouver, that could change some things. That could rattle their cage, so to speak. Boston coming in off of, I would also say, like a match that they probably should have won. Not with or I was looking at a different schedule, but yeah, they should have beat Vancouver. There were opportunities to beat the Surge. They got reverse swept in that series. That was their only match last week. They have two this week. I will go with Boston. I
All
don't
right.
feel like there's a very easy pick here because the Carolina that they have both played, Boston played them in the season opener. Miami played Carolina last week. That Carolina is completely different in performance from what we see, what we've seen. The slasher era of Carolina obviously was not very competitive, and then I don't know. Exceed might be leading the Ravens to the World Championship. I have no idea at this point, but I think Boston will bounce back. Maybe it's me hoping that they're not gonna get reverse swept again, but two inconsistent teams at this point. You really just there's no easy way to predict stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Miami here. I think this is another bit of a toss-up, but given the state of both teams, I'm not really convinced either way in terms of who I would want to pick in this. I've just historically picked against Boston a lot, and especially you picking Boston here. I'll go with Miami. Make sure we have some differences here, but I mean I could see this one going out either way depending on who shows up, and especially if Miami comes out firing on all cylinders against Vancouver. Maybe they're the hot hand coming into this match. But on the other hand, if they come out flat against Vancouver and lose, maybe they're a bit tilted coming into another Saturday match, back-to-back days. So that could be a path to victory for Boston as well. So definitely gonna be a match that maybe isn't super highly anticipated, but I think could be a close one. Wouldn't be surprised to get a Game 5 here.
Next up, Toronto versus Carolina, which is another pretty interesting match because Carolina's coming in off of a 2-0 week with Exceed. They beat Miami and Minnesota. They beat I almost said the Rocker. They beat G2 in Game 5 on Sunday, and they beat Miami 3-1 on Friday. Toronto is coming in off of a very dominant 3-0 win over LA Thieves. They should both feel very good. I definitely have more, like, not respect, but definitely more reverence for Toronto. They have, like, one of the best rosters. I think the trio that we've been talking about for a long time is, like, one of the most talented trios in the league. I think they're better than Carolina, but we saw Carolina just come out of the gates absolutely blazing. We've heard the talk about them going 28-1 in scrims and how they were almost unbeatable with Exceed. I'll go Toronto, but I think this is a good litmus test for where Carolina actually is in relation to some of these teams, because if they win, like, we have to have a major discussion about the Ravens next week.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% where I'm thinking. I'm comparing this to the Gentlemates Falcons match in my head, where it's like, I think even in this case, I'm never not picking Toronto here, but because of Carolina's performance, all that discussion and stuff you highlighted, like, this is one where it's like, I'm not going to pick against Toronto, but I'm definitely more interested to see how Carolina stacks up against Toronto after their performance last week. I think if last week doesn't happen, this is like we're talking Toronto 3-0 and we're talking about it for 15 seconds and moving on to the next match. But because of that performance from Carolina last week, we got to keep our eyes on this one, maybe a little bit more closely than we previously would have, but I still think Toronto gets the job done in the end.
Final match of Saturday is FaZe Vegas versus Cloud9 New York. This is one of the best teams versus one of the worst teams, so you would expect a FaZe slam. I am not entirely sure that will be the case. I think FaZe will win. I'm predicting FaZe will win. But if you look at C9's slate so far, they lost in Game 5 to Minnesota. They then swept Vancouver, as they should. Lost in Game 5 to Miami. Lost in Game 5 to Paris after we said they probably should have swept them in that series. So they're 1-3, but I mean, that's just that's the luck of the draw. Like, that's why you can't go to Game 5s. Sometimes it really is the worst outcome for you. That being said, what we talked about on last episode, FaZe has gone, like, absolutely crazy against the craziest slate that they could in the first few weeks of this season. They have a loss to LAT, which doesn't make any sense now that we look back on it, but they beat Paris. They beat Toronto. They beat OpTic. They swept OpTic last week. I would expect if you're going to beat OpTic, Paris, and Toronto, you should beat C9. But this is the CDL, so things could get a little weird. But I'm going to go with FaZe here.
Yeah, gotta go FaZe. Can't pick against them now until they give us a reason not to pick them. I think it is a little funny though that, the quote unquote easiest match so far for FaZe is against Cloud9, who just like we were literally just saying could have they basically had the opportunity to sweep Gentlemates last week, and they just weren't able to capitalize on it, but they were just a couple points away in that hard point from doing that, and then that would have impacted potentially how we look at this match even, and that this is like the quote unquote easiest match for FaZe on paper so far. So pretty funny. I think so far the tail of the tape for week 4 of Major 1 qualifiers is a lot of matches that, on paper might not have been super interesting, but just because of what has happened recently, they all got a little bit extra juice to them.
Sunday, January 18th, starting off with C9 versus Boston. So both of these teams play on Saturday and Sunday. We just talked about with C9, they've lost these Game 5s. Boston is in a little bit better of a position. They're 2-2, whereas C9 is 1-3. So a win here for Boston not necessarily guarantees them a spot in the winners bracket, but it definitely puts them like in a driver's seat for at least a tiebreaker, and the tiebreaker should work out in their favor. Just to, like, I think really only 8 teams at maximum could finish 3-2 better, so like they should be almost guaranteed a spot if they win this. If they lose though, oh man, like they kind of get screwed out of this because they play LAT next week, which we'll see how that goes. Like it could be beneficial for Boston. You know, like we've talked about the LAT Boston matches before, where C9, like they desperately need a win here. I think they're going to be in the losers bracket just the way things went. But it would definitely be a big win for them. I'm going to go with Boston. I just really don't know what to expect of this match. That's kind of like what I'm thinking about for C9 Carolina and Boston and Minnesota to an extent in general. It's like it's kind of a coin flip when these 4 teams play.
Yeah, give me C9. Looks like you're going with the 2-0 Boston, and I'm going 0-2 Boston. So naturally, something's going to happen there. But I said early on in the season, C9 was my team. I thought was going to be a little bit better potentially early on than other people were giving them credit for. And I think last week was potentially the first like showing we got from that Cloud9 squad of just exactly what I was envisioning from them as, a little bit more dangerous of a team than other people wanted to give them credit for. So give me Cloud9, looking for Beans to have a big game with the sniper and the S&D and take care of business there.
Next up, G2 versus FaZe. G2 has lost its last 3 matches in Game 5s. They lost to Boston, Falcons, and Carolina. We just talked about FaZe. Definitely going to go with FaZe. But,
yep.
I mean, I want to see if Minnesota can actually be competitive with them because there were definitely a lot of high expectations for them coming in off of the preseason, and they just haven't been able to kind of finish the job, I would say. It's not that they haven't been good. They even took a map off of OpTic. They beat Cloud9 in a Game 5. So, like, all but one of their series so far have went to Game 5. It's just they need to finish these series, and that was a major issue last year, and it's continued to be a major issue this year. So who do you have?
Yeah, gotta go FaZe, and that's literally what I was gonna say. Was I don't really have much of a reason to think the series would go to a Game 5 outside of the whole Minnesota thing. But certainly this is a case where if it did go Game 5, I am definitely going with FaZe just because of all the S&D stuff we've broken down before. Last week it was 1-4 in hardpoint for FaZe and 4-1 in S&D. Early signs of another good, strong S&D team for FaZe. And the Game 5 luck has not been there for Minnesota, but that would really be the icing on the cake here for this week of what ifs and all that stuff. If G2 pulls off a Game 5 win against FaZe, that would really just throw everything into chaos. But not banking on it, I'll take FaZe here.
Yeah, Minnesota 1-3 in Game 5, FaZe 2-0. So that's kind of just shows you how things can really turn. And those 2-0 are against Toronto and Paris. So pretty good. And to finish off the week, the HBR Classic, as it has been termed and patent pending by the Ego Chall Podcast Corporation, OpTic Texas versus the Los Angeles Thieves. We've talked about this match just a ton in general, just because I think a lot of people think, including you, I believe, is that this probably will be Kenny's last match, or certainly his last match versus OpTic, most likely. I definitely am picking OpTic. I don't have any faith in LAT. They're absolutely getting crushed by these top teams now. Like we just discussed it, but they beat FaZe to start off the season 3-0, and since then they beat the Falcons 3-1, and then in the final week before the break, they get stomped by Paris 3-0. First week back after the break, they get stomped by Toronto 3-0. Not as bad. I don't want to say like that series wasn't just like a lot more competitive, but certainly not a like. I mean, it's a sweep, and you're one of the best teams in the world. Like, you shouldn't be getting swept by pretty much anybody. And now they're on this 6-map losing streak. They're playing defending world champions who probably are not feeling too great with how last week went and getting swept by FaZe, even though they did end up beating Vancouver. Just a lot of things going on there, and Kenny has not played well at all. I don't know if you saw, but Ben J. Nissim said that if they drop Kenny, that they should drop Abizi as well, or that they could do that. I don't know about that. Like, I don't know who you replace him with. That's kind of the biggest issue with all these roster changes. But I thought it was interesting. I will go with OpTic here. I would assume that you are also going with OpTic.
Yeah, gotta pick OpTic. Can't pick LAT at this current stage with what we've seen from them. Again, this feels like I'm saying it for almost all these matches, but it would be kind of like, just adding more chaos or more fire to the flames or whatever the saying is there. If LAT somehow pulled off this win, we're not only changing tunes on the Kenny thing, but then we're also sitting here like, what the hell is going on with OpTic, right? Like that would be like pure anarchy, it feels like, if LAT were somehow able to pull this off. And I feel like, ironically, this is a little reminiscent to me. Very, very, very different situations, don't get me wrong. But last year, for the 0-18 streak for OpTic, I believe their last match of those qualifiers was against LAT. And I can't remember if that was when they were 0-15 in map count or they were 0-18 and then they won a map. But it was something like, I think it was in like the process or whatever. Like Dashy was like talking, like saying like he actually like felt confident going into that LAT matchup despite being on that historic map losing streak. And maybe this is a case for LAT. Like this is the match they're gonna get extra excited for and be a little more hyped up. Maybe put in some more work this week and. Maybe this is what that team needs to, light a fire under them and get the job done. But I'm not banking on it. I think you got to go with OpTic here. But definitely excited to see how this one plays out, no matter what. I think maybe at worst we get some good trash talk and that'll be that. But I definitely think OpTic should be able to win this one in the end.
In my opinion, it's inevitable that Kenny will be dropped or benched or whatever the case may be at some point this season by LAT. But I think it could be interesting if they win this because it is kind of like, I don't know if you saw the Harbaugh, like not the Harbaugh, but the Ravens owner said like if the Ravens had beat the Steelers in week 18, like what would have happened? And it was like Harbaugh would have been here another week, which is just like the coldest, like most cynical thing that I've ever heard an owner say about a former coach, especially one that was like won you a Super Bowl and everything. But I think that's kind of the case here. Like if LAT beats OpTic, I don't think they make a roster change like right afterward because there's going to be that spark of hope where they're like, oh man, like maybe we're back. Like we could be like a championship contender. I just think it's kind of delaying the inevitable at that point. Like if that happens, I don't think it will. I think OpTic will beat them. I don't know if it'll be a 3-0 stomp like we've been seeing. Like there's got to be like a level of pride for these guys where it's like, man, like this is not a bad roster by any stretch of the imagination. Like we have former MVPs and world champions on this team. Like we should be able to like take a map off of these guys at the very least. But I really am not completely sold on how things are going to go with this other than OpTic winning. Like you said, if OpTic loses, the conversation certainly will be about LAT to some extent, but the conversation would mostly be on like what the hell is wrong with OpTic? Like why'd they lose to FaZe and LAT? And I don't know if there's like a very good answer for that at this point. So it should be interesting. I think we'll have a lot more to discuss this time next week than we had this week, even though we are at an hour. So we're kind of kings of this. Like even when we don't mean to, we're stretching it out. I do want to point out that Harry said that G2 is changing roster after this weekend for real. I think there's a chance. I mean, if they keep losing, like they kind of have to make some changes. We talked about it before though. Like their roster is kind of what it is because there's just not very many options for ARs and like who you can replace with who. Like they would definitely need to dip into the challengers Or call up our boy Doug Senza Martin. So he's
Could
ready.
you imagine if G2 makes a roster change, replacing Skies with whoever, and then LAT decides to get Skies in place of Kenny? Second year in a row, a team would pick up Skies to replace Kenny. Obviously, we joked last episode about Hydra's relationship with Skies
The
going
Val
back to the
Pals.
Valorant days, and yeah. Um, and then I mean, hey, I'm not gonna tell LAT what to do, but OpTic last year they pick up Skies to replace Kenny. Then that leads to getting Merc to replace Sky. Or was Skies already? No, Merc replaced Skies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and that led to a world championship, and they won EWC. So like maybe that's just how the dominoes fall this year. Like obviously they're not going to get Merc, but maybe it's Skies replaces Kenny on LAT, and then another unknown challengers kid replaces Skies on LAT after that, and then that's the formula for success. That'd be certainly a fun narrative there.
Well, I mean, they had that opportunity, and that guy signed with FaZe Vegas. So,
Yep.
I mean, tough break there. And apparently, FaZe like spent some money for Aluka too. Like, people are
Yeah.
saying like hundreds of thousands of dollars for him, which is
Oh
like,
no. It was 20K is the rumor I think for his buyout.
oh, okay. So I saw some crazy information there. So
Yeah.
I was just spreading misinformation. Um, I mean, but that is like, I mean, that was what we were talking about at the time for Aluka was like it. Not that it's a 1-to-1 because Merck actually played against CDL talent on LAN and performed very well for a team that was like in the top 4 for pretty much the entire season on very little notice versus Aluka just absolutely wiping the floor with challengers kids. Um, Even though a lot of them were former CDL pros and he's playing with former CDL pros, but still, like that did seem to be their opportunity to get in. And what Harry just said is interesting. I don't know if it will actually happen, but he said they are willing to loan him out though. I think like to some extent, like FaZe, especially if they're going to be like the top team or one of the top teams now, they probably aren't going to make a roster change immediately. Would they be willing to loan out Aluka to LAT of all teams? Like if I'm FaZe, I'm like I'll eat the salary, I'll eat the money, but I'm not going to give one of the best teams in the league an opportunity to compete with us on that level. Like, you know what I mean? Like it'd be like giving OpTic or FaZe or not FaZe, OpTic, LAT or Paris like another weapon in their arsenal to try to beat us with. I'd be like, Luka's just gonna ride the bench until his contract's up, and maybe that makes me a bad person or whatever. But I don't want to give them anything that they could use to kind of beat me over the head with, which happens in the
Yeah.
NFL. They don't, a lot of teams don't trade within division. I think
Yep.
this is Major League Baseball does this as well. Like, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it, what was it? Otani wasn't going to get traded to an AL team or something like that. Or maybe it was
That was
Juan
just he didn't
Soto.
want to play on the East Coast.
Okay. I thought there was something where it was a team was like, I'm definitely not going to trade this guy within the league. We'll trade him to the
I
NL.
mean
Yeah.
like Yankees, Red Sox, they usually very rarely trade one another, even though they did just 2 years ago. But um, yeah, regardless, in terms of Aluka, I think there was an interview Crowder did with him, and sort of the vibe was basically like they want to do what's best for Aluka, and if an opportunity did present itself like that, where like FaZe contractually still quote unquote owned the rights to Aluka, but they allowed him to go play for another CDL team just because FaZe is so good right now, they don't need him. I guess that's not the craziest thing I've ever heard, and I could see it happening, but to have it happen to LAT would be very weird because I feel like that would be the case where it's like they are literally like making one of the biggest competitors for FaZe Vegas. Like you're basically giving them a better shot to
Yeah.
dethrone FaZe if FaZe is in that position where they don't need to consider using a Luca. So it's definitely a bit of a weird one. I mean, I even there was some stuff with the Neum situation too, where it's like his loan from Huntsman is only like up until Major One, and then if he's not, it was something with Methods and Scump on a podcast, like saying that like um if LAT doesn't pick him up before that, then he'll have an option to go to other teams or whatever. And I think
That's
that's
good.
like that makes more sense. But I mean, we don't know the details of all these contracts and stuff, so that's what makes it harder, and it's a lot of speculation. But um, yeah, I think in terms of Aluka and LAT, I think the only way that would happen is they would have to like straight up, it sounds weird to say that they would have to buy him from FaZe and like his future rights, because it would just be the loan situation would just be, it would feel weird, like especially if he's still on FaZe but he's just being loaned to them. Then like if Aluka plays against FaZe on LAT and he drops a .5, people are like, oh, he's throwing for FaZe. Like that would be a weird situation. So I don't know how that would all go down.
I mean, that was kind of my thing with Neum, was just the OpTic LAT part of it. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a detriment to, or kind of a downside to these CDL teams actually having challengers teams, is there is a conflict of interest with some of these players. I think the easiest way to do it would be for it to kind of, these loans to act as like practice squad in the NFL, where teams can sign players off of opposing teams' practice squad, and they don't have to like really negotiate anything. Or they don't need to get like permission. Like a team can't keep a player on the practice squad, unless they want to just bring them up to the main roster and stuff like that. To me, that makes the most sense, and that's how the CDL should work, because it opens up the flexibility for players where they're not trapped on the bench of a team when they could be a starter for another team in the CDL, which obviously is not ideal at all. Yeah, I think that about does it. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about on Sunday when we're back here, discussing potentially some of the most consequential matches and one of the final matches for Kenny and his CDL career. Pick him so far. You are 18-8. I am 17-9. Trimmer is winless on the season, but we'll talk about it maybe for a birthday gift. Yeah, make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music. We're not on Netflix. We didn't get that multi-million-dollar deal that a bunch of podcasts got to go to Netflix, which I thought was kind of crazy. Didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I think we're at 274, if I'm not mistaken. You can also follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. We're pretty close to getting affiliate status on Twitch. Bink just got affiliate status, so you can check him out at twitch.tv/JBink with 2Ks. You can also follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers. The podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. And most likely the next show will be on Sunday night after the matches. I don't know if Bink is too interested in the playoff slate this weekend, or if there's a game that he really wants to watch. But if it's not Sunday night, then it will be Monday afternoon, most likely, when we talk about these matches and whatever news comes out between now and Sunday night. Yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, I think actually the Sunday games for NFL are, I think the last Sunday game is at 6 o'clock Eastern, so it might work out where we can even wait until that game's done, even regardless of what game it is. But we'll talk about that. Um, yeah, appreciate all the support. Thank you guys as always for tuning in. Shout out Harry and Dominic Wood in the YouTube chat for stopping by. Um, and yeah, not a ton to talk about today, but we still stretched out. I had some good convo and broke some stuff down. So looking forward to this upcoming weekend of matches, second to last one before Major One. That means next week we will have the final week of online matches, and then we have our first LAN event of Black Ops 7. Can't wait. Should be a banger. Should have tons of stuff to talk about leading up to that, and hope you guys will tune in for everything leading up to that and beyond, as this season is just getting underway. So thank you guys as always. Really do appreciate all the support, and we'll see you in the next one. Remember to send the chow.